My in-laws tried to take custody of my daughter after my husband died, filed false CPS reports, and showed up with lawyers demanding I sign over my child. So I gave them a fake DNA test. My husband Joshua died in a car accident when our daughter Lily was 4 years old. It was devastating and sudden, and I was barely functioning those first few weeks. Joshua's parents, Harold and June, showed up for the funeral acting supportive, but something felt off. They kept referring to Lily as their baby and saying things like now she was all they had left of Joshua. They took hundreds of photos of just Lily without me in them. June kept trying to take Lily to the bathroom alone, and Harold measured her height against the doorframe like they were documenting something. 2 weeks after the funeral, they showed up with a lawyer named Francis who handed me custody paperwork. They were seeking full custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother consumed by grief. The paperwork said I'd been neglecting Lily, and they had proof. The proof was photos of me crying at the grocery store while Lily played on my phone. Photos of our messy house taken during the reception after Joshua's funeral. A statement from June saying I'd left Lily alone with them for 3 hours the day after Joshua died when I was at the funeral home. They'd been building a case since the moment Joshua died. Harold said Lily belonged with blood family, and I was just the incubator. June said Joshua would want his daughter raised by people who truly loved him, implying I didn't. Francis said if I cooperated and signed over custody, they'd let me visit Lily once a month supervised. If I fought them, they'd make sure I never saw her again. They actually thought I'd just hand over my daughter because they demanded it. I told them to get out, and June said they'd already filed with the court and I'd be hearing from Child Services. She was right. 2 days later, Child Protective Services showed up for a wellness check. Harold and June had called claiming I was drunk and Lily was in danger. The social worker found me stone sober playing puzzles with Lily in our clean living room. But they kept calling. Every few days, another complaint. I was on drugs. Lily had bruises. There were strange men coming and going. Each investigation found nothing, but it was exhausting and humiliating. Harold and June would show up during these visits acting concerned and offering to take Lily for her safety. The custody hearing was set for 6 weeks later. Harold and June hired 3 lawyers and a private investigator who followed me everywhere. They'd show up at Lily's preschool telling the staff they were the emergency contacts now. They told the pediatrician I was unstable and shouldn't make medical decisions. They told our neighbors they were moving Lily in with them soon for her well-being. They even started redecorating Joshua's old room in their house as Lily's new princess room, and showed people photos like it was decided. That's when I decided to play dirty. I started dropping hints that Joshua might not be Lily's biological father. Nothing direct, just comments about being grateful Harold and June still wanted a relationship despite everything. When June asked what I meant, I'd change the subject and look guilty. I had my friend Rose call Harold pretending to be from a DNA testing company confirming his appointment. Harold had never made an appointment but suddenly became obsessed with the idea. I left a pamphlet about paternity testing on my kitchen counter when they came to visit. I made sure they saw me quickly hide it, but not fast enough. June confronted me demanding to know what I was hiding. I started crying and said Joshua and I had been having problems before Lily was born, but I'd never been sure. And Joshua said it didn't matter because he loved her anyway. This was completely false. Joshua was absolutely Lily's father and we'd been happy. But Harold and June didn't know that. They demanded a DNA test immediately. I acted reluctant, but agreed if they'd drop the custody case. They were so confident Lily was Joshua's that they agreed. I scheduled the test at a clinic my friend's husband owned. He was happy to help after hearing what they'd done. The day of the test, Harold and June brought their whole family to witness what they thought would be their victory. We all gave samples and waited for the rushed results. My friend's husband delivered the news personally that Lily was definitely not related to Harold and June. The test was fake, but the paperwork looked perfect. Harold accused me of cheating, and June called me horrible names in front of their entire family. I acted shocked and said I was just as surprised as them. Their lawyer, Francis, said the custody case was over since they had no biological claim. Harold and June went insane. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Harold's face went from red to purple in about 2 seconds flat. He started screaming that I was a lying whore who trapped his son. June made this sound like a wounded animal and lunged at me across the clinic waiting room. Fletcher stepped between us with 2 of his nurses and they grabbed June's arms before she could reach me. The whole family just stood there frozen like someone hit pause on a movie. Harold kept yelling about how I destroyed their family and stole their grandchild through lies. Security showed up and had to physically escort Harold and June toward the exit while they screamed threats the whole way. June was crying and shouting that she'd prove I faked it somehow. Harold said I'd pay for what I'd done to them. Their daughter covered her face with her hands, and their son just stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Fletcher put his hand on my shoulder and told me to take Lily and go home. I grabbed Lily's hand and we walked out the side door while Harold and June were still being removed from the front entrance. My hands shook so bad on the steering wheel I could barely hold it steady. Lily sat in her car seat behind me playing with her stuffed rabbit like nothing happened. The weight of what I'd just done hit me all at once and I had to pull over for a minute because I couldn't see through the tears. Lily asked why Grandma and Grandpa were yelling so loud. I wiped my eyes and told her they were just very upset right now about some grown-up stuff. She accepted that and went back to making her rabbit hop across the seat. I started driving again and called Montgomery on my phone through the car speakers. He answered on the second ring, and I told him everything that happened at the clinic. He said he'd review the paperwork Harold and June signed and make sure the custody case was officially closed. His voice was calm and steady, and it helped me breathe a little easier. Montgomery called me back an hour later after I got Lily settled at home with her coloring books. He said he'd gone through the agreement Harold and June signed before the DNA test. They explicitly agreed to drop all custody claims if the DNA proved no biological relation between them and Lily. Their signatures were right there on the document, and Francis, their lawyer, had witnessed it and signed too. The custody case was officially over and done. Montgomery said there was no legal way for them to come after Lily now. But he warned me they might try other harassment tactics, since they were clearly unstable and desperate. He suggested documenting everything and being prepared to file for a restraining order if they didn't back off. I thanked him and hung up and just sat on my couch staring at nothing for a while. That night, I held Lily while she slept in her little bed with the butterfly sheets. She looked so peaceful and safe, and I cried quietly so I wouldn't wake her up. Joshua was absolutely her father, and I knew that with complete certainty. I'd just erased his parents from her life with a lie, and there was no taking it back now. But the alternative was losing her to people who called me an incubator and saw her as property they could claim. Harold and June would have taken her away and let me see her once a month like I was some dangerous stranger. I wiped my eyes and kissed Lily's forehead and told myself I did what I had to do, even though the guilt sat heavy in my chest. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was June calling over and over and over. I let it go to voicemail, and she called again immediately. This happened 47 times before I finally blocked her number around 8 a.m. I listened to a few of the voicemails, and they ranged from her begging to see Lily, to threatening legal action, to calling me every horrible name she could think of. Harold started sending text messages around the same time. Each one called me something vile and promised I'd pay for my deception. He said I destroyed their family and stole their only connection to their dead son. He said he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. I saved all the messages in a folder and blocked his number too. Coraline showed up at my door around 10 a.m. after I called her sobbing. I'd held it together as long as I could, but I needed someone to talk to who wasn't a lawyer or a 4-year-old. She came in, and I confessed everything about the fake DNA test while Lily watched cartoons in the other room. Coraline held me while I broke down and told her I felt like a terrible person. She pulled back and looked me right in the eyes and said I did what I had to do to protect my daughter from people who were trying to steal her. She reminded me how Harold and June had been calculating and cruel from the moment Joshua died, how they took photos to build a case and filed false CPS reports, and hired 3 lawyers to take my child away. She said they left me with no good choices, so I made the only one that kept Lily safe. 2 days later, Harold and June showed up at my house around lunchtime. I saw their car pull up and immediately started recording on my phone. They came to my front porch and started pounding on the door, demanding I admit the test was fake. I stood inside with the door locked and kept recording while they screamed accusations. June said she knew I'd somehow switched the samples or paid Fletcher to lie about the results. Harold said there was no way Joshua wasn't Lily's father, and I was running some kind of conspiracy. They went on like this for maybe 10 minutes before I called the police. I told the operator there were people on my property refusing to leave, and I had a recording of the whole thing. The police showed up within 15 minutes and removed Harold and June for trespassing. The officers took my statement and the recording and said I could press charges if I wanted to. Montgomery filed for a restraining order the next day. He used the harassment evidence, the false CPS reports, the threatening voicemails and texts, and the trespassing incident. The court granted a temporary order requiring Harold and June to stay 500 feet away from me, Lily, our home, and her preschool. They couldn't contact us directly or through other people. The hearing for a permanent restraining order was scheduled 3 weeks out. Montgomery said the temporary order would protect us until then, and the evidence was strong enough that the permanent one would probably get approved. I started seeing Valerie for therapy the following week. She specialized in grief counseling and trauma, and I needed help processing everything. I told her about Joshua dying and Harold and June trying to take Lily and the fake DNA test I used to stop them. Valerie listened without judging and then helped me understand I'd been backed into an impossible corner by predators who exploited my vulnerability. She said the deception was survival, not malice, even though the moral weight still felt heavy. We talked about grief and protection, and what it means to be a good mother when there are no good choices. She gave me tools to manage the panic attacks and guilt and fear that kept hitting me in waves. June contacted Fletcher's clinic a few days after the restraining order, demanding to see the actual DNA test results and all the lab documentation. Fletcher had prepared everything perfectly with fake paperwork that looked completely real. It had proper lab letterhead and technical details, and reference numbers that seemed legitimate. June threatened to sue the clinic for fraud, but her lawyer looked at everything and told her there was no legal basis for a lawsuit. The test results appeared valid and properly documented, and there was no evidence of tampering or deception. Fletcher called me after to say we were safe, and the fake paperwork had held up under scrutiny exactly like he'd planned. My phone rang 3 days after the DNA test blew up, and I saw Joshua's brother's name on the screen. Bo hadn't called since the funeral, hadn't responded to any messages about the custody battle. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice came through broken and shaky. Nothing like the confident guy who used to tease Joshua at family dinners. He said he just found out about everything, the custody papers and the lawyers and all the false CPS reports his parents filed. He kept apologizing, saying he had no idea they'd gone that far, that he'd been working overseas and only got back when the DNA results exploded the family. He asked if there was any way he could still see Lily, still be her uncle despite what his parents did. I told him I needed time to think about it and hung up feeling weird and suspicious, but also a little hopeful that maybe not everyone in Joshua's family had lost their minds. Coraline came over the next morning to watch Lily while I met Beau at a coffee shop downtown. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days, with dark circles under his eyes and his hair all messy. We sat at a corner table away from other people and he started talking before I even ordered my drink. He said his parents had become obsessed with Lily after Joshua died, calling her their second chance and saying she was all they had left. He admitted they'd always been controlling with him and Joshua growing up, but this was different, darker, like they'd completely lost touch with reality. He looked genuinely sick when he talked about the false CPS reports and the private investigator following me. He said he confronted them after the DNA test and they wouldn't even listen, just kept screaming about how I'd ruined everything. Beau leaned forward and lowered his voice when he told me what his parents were saying now. They'd convinced themselves I must have switched the DNA samples somehow, or paid Fletcher to fake the results. They were telling everyone who'd listen that there was no possible way Joshua wasn't Lily's father, and I was running some kind of crazy conspiracy to keep them away from their granddaughter. He said they sounded completely unhinged, repeating the same accusations over and over like a broken record. Part of me felt scared hearing this, but another part felt relieved because the more insane they sounded, the less likely anyone would believe them. Beau said even their friends were starting to avoid them because they couldn't talk about anything else. The preschool director called me 2 days later, sounding really upset. She said June had shown up that morning trying to pick up Lily, even though I'd removed her from the emergency contact list weeks ago. Security stopped her at the front door, but she started screaming that her granddaughter was being kept from her, and she had rights. She caused such a big scene that other parents complained and they had to call the police. The cops came and banned her from the property completely, and the director said if June showed up again, they'd press charges for trespassing. I thanked her for protecting Lily and hung up feeling sick to my stomach. They weren't backing off. They were just getting more desperate and unpredictable. Tiana from CPS showed up for what she said would be her final visit the following week. She looked through the house one more time and played with Lily for a few minutes, then sat down with me at the kitchen table. She apologized for everything I'd been put through and said her report would note that all the complaints were clearly malicious and totally unfounded. She told me she'd seen cases like this before, grandparents weaponizing the system during custody fights, using CPS as a weapon to harass parents they were battling. She officially closed the case and said unless new credible concerns came up, they wouldn't be back. I almost cried with relief when she left, knowing that particular nightmare was finally over. I took Lily to see Valerie the next week for a session focused just on her. Lily played with toys in the corner, while Valerie asked her gentle questions about how she was feeling about Grandma and Grandpa. Lily said she missed them a little, but she was okay, and she liked playing with Uncle Beau when he visited. Valerie explained in simple kid language that sometimes grown-ups have big disagreements and need space from each other for a while. She asked Lily if she felt safe and happy at home, and Lily nodded and went back to her coloring. Valerie told me afterward that Lily seemed remarkably well-adjusted considering everything, probably because I'd kept the worst of the conflict away from her. Kids are more resilient than we think when they feel secure with their primary caregiver. A certified letter arrived the following Tuesday from a lawyer I'd never heard of. Harold was demanding I submit to another DNA test at a lab of their choosing, claiming the first results were fraudulent. The letter used a lot of legal language about scientific integrity and parental rights. I forwarded it to Montgomery, who responded the same day with his own letter. He wrote that the matter was closed per the signed agreement Harold and June had made before the test, and any further harassment would result in additional legal action, including possible charges for stalking. Montgomery told me the threats were getting desperate and scattered, which meant they were running out of options and lawyers willing to take their increasingly weird case. June posted something on social media a few days later that one of my friends sent me a screenshot of. She'd written this long post about being kept from her granddaughter and hinting that I was abusing Lily. She didn't use names, but it was obvious who she meant. Several people who knew the real story commented with the truth about the custody attempt and all the false CPS reports. Someone even mentioned the restraining order. June deleted the whole post within a few hours after it completely backfired. But people had already taken screenshots and the damage to her reputation was done. Her attempt to make me look bad had just made her look more unhinged to everyone watching. The permanent restraining order hearing finally arrived 3 weeks after the temporary one was granted. I brought a thick folder of evidence showing all the harassment, the threatening voicemails and texts, the trespassing incident, the preschool scene. Harold and June showed up with yet another lawyer who argued they were just grieving grandparents being denied access to their only grandchild. The judge read through the custody paperwork and the false CPS reports with his mouth pressed into a thin line. He looked at Harold and June and asked if they understood how serious it was to file false reports with child services. Their lawyer tried to argue they'd had legitimate concerns, but the judge cut him off. He granted the permanent restraining order for 3 years, requiring them to stay away from me, Lily, our home, and her school. They couldn't contact us directly or through other people. If they violated it even once, they'd face criminal charges. Beau called me after the hearing and asked if we could talk about him maintaining a relationship with Lily separate from his parents. I was hesitant because I didn't want any connection back to Harold and June, but Beau had been consistently respectful and genuinely horrified by everything they'd done. We agreed he could visit at my house with me present. Supervised visits where he could be her uncle without bringing any of the toxic grandparent stuff into it. He seemed relieved and grateful, and promised he'd never try to manipulate the situation or pass information to his parents. I wanted to believe him because Lily deserved to know at least one person from Joshua's family who wasn't completely broken. The first panic attack hit me in the parking lot of the grocery store when I saw a silver sedan that looked exactly like Harold and June's car. My chest locked up and my hands started shaking so bad I couldn't get my keys in the ignition. Lily asked me what was wrong, and I couldn't even answer her because I was gasping for air like someone drowning. It wasn't their car, just one that looked similar, but my body reacted like they were right there ready to snatch Lily away from me. I managed to drive home with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel and called Valerie the second I got inside. She fit me in for an emergency session that afternoon and explained this was completely normal after prolonged harassment and threats. My nervous system had been in constant fight or flight mode for months, and now it was stuck in that pattern even when the actual danger had passed. She taught me breathing exercises and grounding techniques, ways to remind my body that I was safe now. The hypervigilance would fade with time and safety, she promised, but I needed to be patient with myself while my brain rewired. For weeks after that, I'd see cars that looked like theirs everywhere, even though they lived 30 minutes away and had a restraining order keeping them from coming near us. Each time my heart would race and my palms would sweat until I could confirm it wasn't actually them. Lily brought up Harold and June one evening while we were eating dinner. She asked when she'd see Grandma and Grandpa again in this casual way, like she was asking about any normal relatives. I set down my fork and told her they were taking a very long break because of grown-up problems. Nothing she did wrong, just complicated adult stuff that was hard to explain. She nodded and accepted this without any follow-up questions, then immediately started talking about the art project she was making at preschool with glitter and popsicle sticks. Her ability to just move on from heavy topics amazed me. She didn't seem upset or confused, just matter-of-fact about the situation. Part of me felt relieved that she wasn't traumatized by losing contact with them, but another part worried about long-term impacts I couldn't see yet. Was she internalizing feelings she couldn't express? Would this abandonment by her grandparents show up later in therapy sessions when she was older? I had no way to know, so I just watched her carefully for any signs of distress and made sure she knew I was always available to talk about feelings. Coraline came over the following weekend with boxes of security cameras she'd ordered online. She spent hours helping me install them around the perimeter of my house, mounting them under the eaves and connecting them to my Wi-Fi network. The footage saved automatically to cloud storage, and I could monitor everything from an app on my phone. We positioned cameras to cover the front door, back door, driveway, and both sides of the house so there were no blind spots. Just having the cameras up made me feel more secure, like I had evidence gathering 24 hours a day if Harold and June violated the restraining order. Coraline showed me how to check the footage and set up motion alerts so I'd get notifications if anyone approached the house. She also helped me change all the locks and install a deadbolt on Lily's bedroom door, extra security measures that felt excessive but necessary. When we finished, she made me promise to call her immediately if anything suspicious showed up on the cameras. I tested the system by walking around outside while watching the feed on my phone, and seeing myself on the screen from multiple angles was both creepy and comforting at the same time. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a massive arrangement of pink roses and white lilies delivered by a local florist. The card was handwritten by June, her distinctive loopy cursive begging to see Lily and claiming they'd accept any relationship I was willing to allow. She wrote about how much they missed their granddaughter and promised to respect my boundaries if I'd just give them a chance. Reading it made my stomach turn because it sounded so reasonable and sad, like they were the victims here instead of the people who'd tried to steal my child. I took photos of the flowers, the card, and the delivery receipt, then called Montgomery immediately. He said this absolutely violated the no-contact provision of the restraining order and told me to document everything and send him the evidence. I emailed him the photos within minutes. He forwarded everything to the court that same day, and June received an official warning about compliance with the order. Montgomery explained that any future violations could result in criminal charges and possible jail time. The flowers sat on my kitchen counter for an hour while I decided what to do with them. Then I threw the entire arrangement in the trash because I didn't want that manipulation in my house. 3 months after the fake DNA test, I woke up one morning and realized I could breathe normally again. The constant fear and hypervigilance that had been my baseline for so long were fading gradually into something more manageable. I still checked the security cameras multiple times a day, and my heart still jumped when I saw silver sedans, but the intensity had decreased. Lily was thriving at her preschool, making friends and learning songs she'd sing at home constantly. Her teacher reported she was socially well-adjusted and showed no signs of trauma or behavioral issues. The fact that she didn't seem damaged by losing contact with Harold and June relieved some of the guilt I'd been carrying about the fake DNA test. Maybe I'd protected her not just from losing me, but from people who would have hurt her in ways I couldn't fully predict. My sleep improved, and I stopped having nightmares about custody hearings and CPS investigations. The house felt like ours again instead of a fortress under siege. I could take Lily to the park without constantly scanning for Harold and June's car. Life was starting to feel almost normal, whatever normal meant for a widow raising a daughter alone while hiding behind a lie. Bo started visiting every other weekend, bringing age-appropriate gifts like coloring books and stuffed animals. He'd sit on the floor with Lily building block towers and playing pretend games, acting like a normal uncle without any of the toxic possession his parents had displayed. He never mentioned Harold and June or asked questions designed to gather information he could pass along to them. He just genuinely enjoyed spending time with his niece and respected the boundaries I'd set. Watching them together made me cautiously grateful that Lily could maintain some connection to Joshua's family through someone healthy and respectful. Bo looked so much like Joshua that sometimes it hurt to watch him, but it also felt good to see family resemblance in someone who wasn't trying to hurt us. He always asked permission before taking photos with Lily, and sent them to me instead of posting them anywhere Harold and June might see. His loyalty to his niece over his parents' delusions was remarkable and unexpected. I'd worried he might be a spy or try to manipulate the situation, but he proved himself trustworthy, visit after visit. Valerie helped me work through the complicated grief of losing Joshua while simultaneously fighting his parents. I explained that I couldn't properly mourn my husband because I'd been in survival mode protecting our daughter from his family. The grief and the battle had gotten tangled together until I couldn't separate them. Now that things had calmed down, the grief was hitting me in waves mixed with anger at Harold and June for corrupting even my memories of Joshua with their behavior. I couldn't think about our wedding without remembering how his parents had tried to control every detail. I couldn't look at photos of Joshua holding baby Lily without thinking about how his parents had tried to take her from me. They'd poisoned my past by attacking my present, and I was furious about it. Valerie helped me create separate spaces in my mind for grieving Joshua versus processing what his parents had done. She reminded me that Joshua would have been horrified by their actions and would have protected Lily just like I did. That helped some, imagining him standing beside me against them instead of being the reason they came after us. I found a box of old photos in the closet one afternoon while cleaning, pictures of Joshua growing up with his parents. Looking through them with new eyes after everything that happened, I could see the control and possession in their body language even back then. June's hand was always gripping Joshua's shoulder in this tight way, fingers digging in like she owned him. Harold positioned him in photos like a trophy they'd won, always centered and displayed. There were hardly any photos of Joshua looking genuinely happy or relaxed with them. Even as a kid, his smile looked forced in family pictures. Joshua had mentioned his parents were intense and had high expectations, but I'd thought he just meant they were strict or traditional. I didn't understand the depth of their dysfunction until they targeted Lily, and I saw that same possessive energy directed at her. They'd tried to own Joshua his whole life, and when he died, they transferred that ownership feeling onto his daughter. Looking at those old photos made me realize I'd saved Lily from repeating Joshua's childhood, from being gripped and positioned and displayed as their property, instead of being loved as her own person. The pediatrician's office called on a Thursday morning to report an incident. Harold had contacted them trying to request Lily's medical records and claiming he had grandparent rights to access her health information. The office manager had denied the request and documented the entire interaction, including Harold's increasingly aggressive tone when told no. She wanted me to know in case it was part of a larger pattern of behavior. I thanked her for the heads up and called Montgomery immediately. He added this to the restraining order violation file we were building in case Harold and June's behavior escalated further. Montgomery said the medical records request was legally questionable since they had no custody or guardianship rights, and it showed they were still trying to insert themselves into Lily's life despite the court order. He sent a letter to their lawyer warning that any further attempts to access information about Lily would be treated as harassment and violations of the restraining order. The pediatrician's office added notes to Lily's file about the situation and flagged Harold and June's names, so any future contact attempts would be immediately reported to me and documented. 4 months after the fake DNA test, Lily mentioned Grandma and Grandpa only occasionally and without any distress in her voice. She'd see an older couple at the store and comment that they looked like grandparents, or she'd remember something they'd given her before everything exploded, but it was casual observation rather than grief or longing. She'd formed much closer bonds with Coraline, who took her for special aunt and niece days at the zoo or children's museum. Bo's regular visits gave her consistent connection to Joshua's side of the family through someone stable and kind. My parents had stepped up their involvement too, driving in from 2 hours away every few weeks to spend weekends with us and take Lily to parks and libraries. The family structure around her looked completely different from it would have with Harold and June in the picture, but it was healthier and based on actual love instead of possession and control. She had adults in her life who saw her as a person to nurture rather than property to claim. Watching her thrive in this new configuration eased some of my guilt about the deception, even though the moral weight of the lie still sat heavy on my conscience during quiet moments alone. The mail came on a Tuesday afternoon while Lily was at preschool. I sorted through the usual bills and advertisements until I found the official envelope from a law firm 2 states away. My hands shook as I opened it. The letterhead showed an address 800 miles from here in a retirement community I'd never heard of. Harold and June were moving. The notice was brief and formal, just informing me of their address change for legal purposes related to the restraining order. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to process what this meant. Beau called that evening after Lily was asleep. He sounded tired when he told me his parents had put their house on the market 3 weeks ago without telling anyone. They'd been packing in secret and hired movers to take everything to this retirement place near the coast. June had been telling their friends they couldn't bear to live in the same town where Joshua died. She said it hurt too much to see places he used to go and know their granddaughter was being kept from them just miles away. Harold told the neighbors they needed a fresh start somewhere they wouldn't be constantly reminded of their loss. Beau said the whole story was designed to make them look like grieving victims, instead of the people who'd tried to steal my daughter. The retirement community was gated with security and activities for older residents. They'd signed a lease on a 2-bedroom unit with an ocean view. Beau had seen photos June posted on social media before quickly deleting them. She'd captioned one picture talking about new beginnings and healing from family betrayal. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. 800 miles of distance between Harold and June and Lily felt like a gift I hadn't dared to hope for. The legal barriers were strong, but geography added another layer of protection that made me breathe easier. Beau asked if I was okay, and I told him I was more than okay. 3 weeks after the moving notice, Montgomery called to say he'd received a letter from June's new lawyer. I drove to his office during my lunch break and sat across from his desk while he slid the envelope toward me. The letter was typed on expensive paper with June's new attorney's letterhead embossed at the top. She was offering to drop all hostility and cease any future legal action if I would admit the DNA test was fabricated and allow supervised monthly visits with Lily. The lawyer's language was careful and formal, but the desperation underneath was obvious. June wanted validation that she was right, that Lily was absolutely their biological grandchild, that I had lied and manipulated to keep their family apart. She was willing to trade peace for the truth she needed to hear. Montgomery watched my face while I read. He'd already drafted a response that he showed me next. It was brief and firm, stating I had nothing to admit. The DNA test results stood as documented, and the restraining order would remain in full effect for its duration. He said June's offer was a trap designed to get me to confess to fabricating evidence. Any admission could potentially be used to reopen legal proceedings or file criminal charges for fraud. Even if June claimed she'd drop everything, there was no guarantee, and my confession would give them ammunition they currently lacked. I signed off on Montgomery's response and watched him seal it in an envelope. Part of me felt sorry for June in a distant way. She was clearly broken by losing Joshua and then losing access to Lily. Her entire world had collapsed, and she was grasping for anything that would make sense of the chaos. But I couldn't risk Lily's safety for June's peace of mind. The desperation in that letter proved they still saw Lily as something they owned, something stolen from them that they deserved to reclaim. Their grief didn't erase the calculated cruelty of their custody attempt. Montgomery mailed the response that afternoon. I sat in Valerie's office the following Thursday, trying to explain the guilt that kept surfacing at random moments. She listened while I talked about June's letter and the move and how part of me wondered if I should have found another way. The fake DNA test had worked, but it felt like a stain I couldn't wash off no matter how many times I justified it to myself. Valerie leaned forward and asked what other options Harold and June had given me. I went through it all again. The custody ambush 2 weeks after Joshua's funeral. The false CPS reports designed to build a case against me. The 3 lawyers and private investigator. The systematic manipulation of everyone in my life, from Lily's preschool to our pediatrician to our neighbors. The princess room they'd decorated before any court decision. The threats that I'd never see Lily again if I fought them. Valerie asked what ethical choice existed in that situation. I could lose my daughter to people who saw her as property and me as an incubator. Or I could use deception to protect her from predators who'd proven they'd destroy me to get what they wanted. Those were my only options. She said I'd chosen Lily's safety over my own moral comfort, which was exactly what a mother should do when backed into an impossible corner. The deception was morally complicated, but the motivation was pure protection. Harold and June had created a situation where normal ethical behavior meant losing my child. They'd forced me into territory where the usual rules didn't apply because they'd already broken every rule themselves. I cried in her office for 20 minutes while she sat quietly. When I finally stopped, she reminded me that guilt was natural, but I needed to separate the weight of deception from the necessity of survival. I'd saved Lily from a toxic situation using the only weapon available. That didn't make me a bad person. It made me a mother who refused to be destroyed by people who'd mistaken grief for ownership. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I pulled out a blank journal I'd bought weeks earlier but hadn't been able to open. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and stared at the empty first page for a long time. Finally, I started writing. I documented everything from Joshua's death through the funeral and Harold and June's immediate obsession with Lily. I wrote about the custody paperwork and false CPS reports and systematic harassment. I described the fake DNA test plan and execution and aftermath. I wrote it all as clearly and honestly as I could, including my own doubts and guilt about the deception. This journal was for Lily to read when she was old enough to understand. Maybe when she was 16 or 20 or 30, whenever she asked the hard questions about why her father's parents weren't in her life. She deserved to know the truth about what happened and why I made the choices I did. I wanted her to have the full story, including the parts that made me look bad, the lies I told and the manipulation I used and the relationship I destroyed. She could judge my methods when she was old enough to understand the impossible situation. I wrote for 2 hours that first night, filling page after page with details I was terrified of forgetting. The journal would be my insurance that she'd know the truth even if something happened to me before I could tell her in person. I hid it in my closet behind a box of old sweaters, where it would stay safe until the right time came. Beau called on Saturday morning while I was making pancakes with Lily. She was pouring chocolate chips into the batter and didn't notice when I stepped into the hallway to take the call. Beau's voice was strained when he told me his parents were still insisting to everyone that I'd faked the DNA test. They'd apparently been telling their new neighbors at the retirement community that their son's widow had fabricated test results to keep their granddaughter away from them. They showed people photos of Lily and talked about how she was absolutely their biological grandchild, being held hostage by a vindictive woman. Beau said their social circle back home had mostly stopped engaging with the topic because Harold and June sounded increasingly unhinged. People would nod politely and change the subject when June started talking about conspiracy and fraud and stolen grandchildren. But in their new community where no one knew the backstory, they were finding fresh audiences for their delusion. The retirement community had a social committee that organized activities, and June had joined immediately. She'd been showing photos of Lily at coffee hours and book clubs, telling anyone who'd listen about the family tragedy. Beau had heard this from a family friend who had a relative in the same community. The delusion had become their entire identity and grief. They'd built a complete narrative where they were victims of my cruelty, instead of people who'd tried to steal a child through legal manipulation. Beau sounded exhausted when he said he'd tried talking to them, but they wouldn't hear anything that contradicted their version of events. I thanked him for the warning and went back to the kitchen where Lily was arranging chocolate chips in a smiley face pattern. 5 months had passed since the fake DNA test when I finally felt ready to take Lily back to the cemetery. We stopped at a flower shop and I let her pick out a small bouquet of yellow roses. She held them carefully in her lap during the drive, asking questions about where we were going. I explained we were visiting Daddy's special place where we could talk to him and remember happy times. The cemetery was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon with just a few other visitors scattered among the headstones. I parked and held Lily's hand as we walked to Joshua's grave. His headstone was simple gray granite with his name and dates, and a line about being a beloved husband and father. Lily stared at it for a moment, then carefully placed the roses at the base. I sat on the grass and pulled her into my lap. We talked about Joshua while she pulled petals off one of the roses and arranged them in patterns. I told her about how Daddy used to make funny voices when he read her bedtime stories, and how he'd dance with her in the kitchen while I cooked dinner. How he'd been so excited the day she was born that he cried happy tears. Lily listened and played with the flower petals, asking occasional questions. Then she asked if Daddy knew that Grandma and Grandpa were mad at us. I felt my throat tighten but kept my voice steady. I told her that Daddy would want everyone to be kind to each other and love each other even when things were hard. She seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to arranging petals. We stayed for half an hour before the breeze picked up and Lily got cold. I took one last look at the headstone and promised Joshua silently that I'd protected our daughter the only way I could. I woke up one morning and realized I'd slept through the entire night without waking up in a panic. It had been happening gradually over the past few weeks, but this was the first time I'd noticed the change consciously. For months after the custody battle started, I'd been jolting awake multiple times each night, convinced something terrible was happening to Lily. I'd check her room obsessively and lie awake replaying worst-case scenarios. The constant flood of stress hormones had left me exhausted and jumpy during the day, but something had shifted. My body was finally learning it was safe again. I mentioned it to Valerie during our next session and she smiled. She said my nervous system had been stuck in survival mode for so long that it needed time to recalibrate to safety. The restraining order and distance and lack of new threats were allowing my brain to release the hypervigilance slowly. She warned that some level of healthy caution would probably remain given what I'd been through. I'd likely always be more alert to potential threats against Lily than parents who hadn't fought off a custody attempt. But the constant panic was fading into something more manageable. I could function again without the crushing weight of fear that had been my constant companion. I drove home from that session feeling lighter than I had in months. Montgomery called to give me an update on the restraining order violation file. It had stayed empty since the flower incident. Harold and June hadn't attempted any contact or shown up anywhere they weren't supposed to be. The file remained active and ready in case we needed it, but the immediate threat seemed to have passed. Montgomery said their move out of state combined with the legal barriers appeared to be working. Either they'd accepted they couldn't access Lily, or they were biding their time and planning something we couldn't see yet. He advised staying vigilant, but acknowledged the situation felt more stable than it had in months. The restraining order had 2.5 years remaining before it expired. Montgomery recommended we start planning renewal procedures about 6 months before expiration to ensure continuous protection. He'd seen cases where grandparents waited out restraining orders, then immediately resumed harassment once the legal protection lapsed. We couldn't assume Harold and June's current silence meant permanent acceptance. I thanked him and added a reminder to my phone calendar for a year and a half in the future. The legal protections would stay in place as long as I had any say in the matter. Lily started asking more questions about Joshua during our bedtime routine. She wanted to know what his favorite color was, and what games he liked to play, and whether he was good at drawing. I answered each question with specific happy memories, keeping my description simple and positive. She deserved to know her father as the loving dad he'd been, not through the twisted lens of his parents' dysfunction. I told her about how Joshua used to build elaborate block towers with her and make them crash down in dramatic fashion. How he'd sing silly songs he made up on the spot. How he'd been gentle and patient when teaching her to ride her tricycle. Bo started helping with this during his visits. He'd share stories from their childhood that showed Joshua's kindness and humor. He told Lily about the time Joshua rescued a bird with a broken wing and kept it in a shoebox until it healed. About how Joshua always stood up for kids being bullied at the school. About his terrible jokes that made everyone groan but laugh anyway. Lily absorbed these stories and started incorporating them into her own understanding of who her daddy had been. She'd mention him casually during play, telling her dolls that her daddy liked blue or that he was good at fixing things. The memories were becoming real to her in a healthy way that didn't involve the toxic possession Harold and June had tried to claim. I walked into the community center on a Wednesday evening for the widowed parents support group Valerie had recommended. 8 people sat in a circle of folding chairs looking as nervous and exhausted as I felt. The facilitator welcomed me and we went around introducing ourselves. Each person shared their story of loss and survival. A man whose wife died of cancer, leaving him with 3 kids under 10. A woman whose husband had a heart attack while coaching their son's soccer game. Another woman whose partner died in a workplace accident when their daughter was just 6 months old. Their stories of grief mixed with the overwhelming responsibility of single parenting felt painfully familiar. Several mentioned difficult relationships with in-laws, though none had dealt with custody attempts. One woman described her late husband's mother calling constantly to criticize her parenting and demand more access to the grandchildren. Another man talked about his wife's family trying to take over all decision-making about the kids because they didn't trust him to parent alone. Hearing their experiences helped normalize what I'd been through, even if the details were different. The isolation of grief combined with family conflict was something they all understood. We talked for 2 hours about coping strategies and legal protections and therapy resources. When the meeting ended, several people exchanged phone numbers. I drove home feeling less alone than I had in months. The validation that other people had survived similar impossible situations made my own survival feel less like barely holding on and more like actual strength. Coraline showed up Saturday morning with coffee and empty boxes. She didn't ask if I was ready, just started pulling Joshua's clothes from the closet and folding them into neat piles. I stood in the doorway watching her work through his button-downs and jeans, the shirts he'd worn to work, and the ratty college sweatshirt he refused to throw away. She held up each item and waited for me to nod yes or no. Most went into donation boxes, but some I couldn't let go. His favorite flannel that still smelled like his cologne. The concert t-shirt from our first date. The hoodie he'd been wearing the morning he died. Those went into a smaller box labeled for Lily. We moved to his desk next, sorting through papers and photos and random trinkets he'd collected. Coraline found a stack of letters Joshua had written to Lily before she was born, sealed envelopes with her name written in his messy handwriting. I opened one and read his hopes for her future, his promises to be a good dad, his excitement about meeting her. The tears came hard and fast, but they felt clean somehow, like actual grief instead of the panicked survival mode I'd been stuck in for months. We filled 3 memory boxes with photos and letters and small things that captured who Joshua had been. A ticket stub from a movie we'd seen. A rock Lily had given him that he'd kept on his desk. A birthday card I'd made him with terrible drawings. Coraline labeled each box carefully and stacked them in Lily's closet where she could access them when she was older. The donation boxes went to the garage and suddenly the bedroom felt lighter. Less like a shrine and more like a space where I could actually breathe. The preschool director caught me during pickup on Tuesday. She asked if I had a few minutes to talk about Lily, and my stomach dropped with automatic fear. But her smile was warm, and she led me to her office where Lily's artwork covered the walls. She explained they'd been doing family discussion time, where kids shared stories about their parents and siblings. Lily had been talking about her daddy almost every session, describing him from the photos at home and the stories I'd been telling her. She'd told the class her daddy liked blue and was good at building towers and made funny faces that made her laugh. The director said Lily's descriptions were detailed and accurate, showing she was building a real relationship with Joshua's memory instead of just abstract loss. She mentioned Lily had drawn a picture of our family with Joshua included, all of us holding hands and smiling. The teacher said she seemed emotionally healthy and well-adjusted despite losing her father so young. There was no confusion or distress when she talked about him, just matter-of-fact acceptance that he was her daddy, and she loved him even though he wasn't here anymore. The director showed me the family portrait Lily had drawn, and I traced the crayon outline of Joshua's figure. She'd drawn him tall with brown hair and a big smile, exactly how he'd looked. I thanked the director and drove home feeling grateful that Lily was processing the loss in healthy ways. She wasn't traumatized or broken, just a little girl who knew her daddy loved her. The official notification arrived by certified mail on Thursday. Harold and June had completed their move to the retirement community in Arizona, 800 miles away from us. The letter came from their new address with a return label showing the community name. I stood in my driveway holding the envelope and felt something release in my chest. The geographic distance added another layer of protection beyond the legal barriers. They couldn't just show up at Lily's preschool or my house anymore. They couldn't drive by to watch us or corner me at the grocery store. Bo called that evening to confirm they'd settled into their new place. He said they were telling everyone in the community that their son's widow wouldn't let them see their granddaughter. They'd painted themselves as victims denied access to the child they loved. The neighbors apparently ate it up, offering sympathy and outrage on their behalf. Bo said his parents had created an entire narrative where they were the wronged parties, and I was the villain. But he also said the distance meant they were someone else's problem now. Their new community could believe whatever story Harold and June wanted to tell. We were 800 miles away living our actual lives. 6 months after Joshua's death, I woke up and realized I was functioning again. Not just surviving, but actually living in ways that seemed impossible during those first terrible weeks. I was back at work full-time, handling projects and meetings without my brain shutting down. Lily was thriving at preschool, making friends and learning new things every day. We had routines now. Normal, boring routines like breakfast and bedtime and weekend errands. The grief was still there, sitting heavy in my chest every morning when I woke up alone. But it wasn't paralyzing anymore. I could feel sad about losing Joshua while still getting Lily ready for school and making dinner and paying bills. The terror of losing her to Harold and June had faded to manageable caution. I still checked the security cameras and kept my phone close. I still scanned parking lots for their car and avoided places they used to frequent. But the constant panic had settled into reasonable vigilance. We were safe and protected and building a life that honored Joshua without being destroyed by his parents. Valerie asked during our Thursday session how I planned to handle the DNA test situation with Lily long-term. When she was older and understood what had happened, would she see it as justified protection or manipulative deception? I didn't have good answers. Part of me believed she'd understand I had no choice, that Harold and June had backed me into a corner where lying was the only way to keep her safe. But another part worried she'd see it as proof I was willing to lie about fundamental things like her father's identity. Valerie helped me work through the complexity without trying to give easy answers. She said the truth was probably somewhere in the middle, that Lily might understand my motivation while still feeling uncomfortable with the method. I told Valerie I was committed to being honest with Lily when she was old enough to understand. I'd tell her exactly what happened and why I made the choice I did. I'd accept whatever judgment she made about my actions. Valerie said that level of honesty and accountability was all I could offer. The rest would be up to Lily to process in her own time and way. Bo brought his girlfriend to meet Lily on Saturday afternoon. Her name was Sarah, and she worked as a teacher at an elementary school 2 towns over. She came in carrying a children's book about feelings and a stuffed elephant. Lily took to her immediately, showing her the toy kitchen and demanding they play restaurant together. Sarah was warm and natural with her, asking questions and playing along without trying too hard. She didn't mention Joshua or try to fill any kind of mother role. She just treated Lily like a kid she genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Bo watched them play with visible relief, like he'd been worried about how this introduction would go. Later, while Lily was distracted with coloring, Sarah told me she understood the situation with Harold and June. Bo had explained everything, and she supported his decision to maintain boundaries with his parents, while staying connected to his niece. She said she'd lost her own father young and knew how important it was for Lily to have healthy family connections. Watching them leave together, Bo's hand on Sarah's back and both of them waving to Lily, felt like seeing Joshua's family expand in good directions. The toxic elements were distant, but the healthy parts were growing stronger. Montgomery's office was downtown in a building with too much marble and uncomfortable chairs. I sat across from him while he spread paperwork across his desk. We were updating my will and custody arrangements to make absolutely sure Harold and June could never gain access to Lily if something happened to me. Coraline was named primary guardian with detailed documentation of the custody battle and restraining order attached. Montgomery had included references to the DNA test situation without explicitly admitting the deception. The language was careful, noting that Harold and June had agreed to drop custody claims based on test results, and that agreement remained legally binding. He'd also added provisions that even if the DNA test was later challenged or disputed, the custody arrangement stood based on their documented harassment and false CPS reports. The paperwork was complex, but Montgomery walked me through every section. If I died, Coraline would have immediate legal custody with full authority to maintain the restraining order and block any contact attempts. Harold and June's names were specifically listed as prohibited from guardianship consideration. I signed everything, and Montgomery filed copies with the court. Leaving his office, I felt the same relief I'd felt after the restraining order was granted. Another layer of legal protection locked into place. The guilt hit hardest late at night when Lily was asleep and the house was quiet. I'd lie in bed replaying the fake DNA test, seeing Harold's purple face and June's shocked expression when Fletcher delivered the false results. I'd remember Joshua's face in our wedding photos and wonder what he'd think about me lying about his daughter's paternity to protect her from his parents. The weight of it pressed down until I couldn't breathe. Then I'd force myself to remember the specific things that led to that moment. Harold calling me an incubator. June's systematic false CPS reports designed to make me look unfit. Their complete disregard for Lily's bond with me or her emotional well-being. The way they'd shown up with lawyers 2 weeks after Joshua died, before I'd even begun to process his death. They'd given me a choice between ethics and my daughter's safety. They'd backed me into a corner where the only weapon I had was deception. I'd make the same choice again. Every single time. The guilt was real and heavy, but so was the knowledge that Lily was safe and thriving, because I'd been willing to do whatever it took. Lily and I started new holiday traditions that didn't involve Harold and June's toxic presence. We baked Joshua's favorite chocolate chip cookies using the recipe his grandmother had taught him. We watched the superhero movies he'd loved, and I told her stories about how Daddy used to quote all the lines. We made ornaments with his photo and hung them on the tree where she could see his face smiling down. She was building a relationship with her father through memory and love, instead of through the possessive ownership Harold and June had tried to claim. When she asked questions about him, I answered honestly with specific, happy details. I told her about how he'd sing made-up songs while doing dishes, and how he'd been terrible at dancing, but did it anyway to make her laugh. The traditions felt good and right, honoring Joshua without the weight of his parents' dysfunction, crushing everything. I ran into Mrs. A. Anderson at the grocery store on Wednesday morning. She'd been one of the neighbors Harold and June had tried to turn against me during the custody battle. She stopped her cart when she saw me and I braced for confrontation. Instead, she apologized. She said she felt terrible about initially believing Harold and June's claims that I was unstable and neglecting Lily. She'd realized after they moved away that they'd been running a manipulation campaign throughout the neighborhood. Other neighbors had compared notes and figured out Harold and June had been telling different lies to different people, building a false narrative that I was an unfit mother. Mrs. Anderson said the community had largely realized the truth about what they'd tried to do. She asked how Lily was doing, and I told her she was thriving. We talked for a few minutes about normal neighborhood things, and then went our separate ways. Driving home, I felt something shift. The community that Harold and June had tried to poison against me was healing. People were seeing through their lies. We weren't isolated and under siege anymore. We were just a regular family living in our neighborhood. Beau visited on a Tuesday afternoon while Lily was at preschool, and we sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee. He told me his parents called him every few days asking about Lily and demanding information about her life. They wanted to know what she looked like now, what she was learning, if she mentioned them, if she seemed happy. Beau said he kept his answers short and firm, telling them only that Lily was healthy and happy and nothing more. He'd made it clear to Harold and June that his relationship with me and Lily existed separately from their mess, and he wouldn't be their spy or messenger. They accused him of betrayal and taking my side against family, but he held his ground. His loyalty to his niece over his parents' twisted claims about ownership impressed me more than I could express. He said they still insisted the DNA test was fake and I'd somehow tricked everyone, but their story changed depending on who they talked to. Sometimes I'd switch the samples. Sometimes Fletcher was in on a conspiracy. Sometimes the whole thing was elaborate revenge for some imagined slight. Their delusion had become their entire identity, and Beau said it was exhausting watching them destroy themselves over lies they'd convinced themselves were truth. I thanked him for being the one decent connection Lily had to Joshua's family, and he got tears in his eyes saying she deserved to know her father's memory without the poison his parents spread. 7 months had passed since the fake DNA test, and I found myself able to look at our wedding photos without completely falling apart. I pulled the album from the shelf one Saturday morning and sat on the couch flipping through pages while Lily played with blocks nearby. The photos showed Joshua and me laughing during our first dance, cutting the cake with frosting on our noses, kissing under the sunset with his hand cradling my face. I could see the genuine love we'd shared and the family we'd created together, untainted by what his parents became after his death. The grief still hit me in waves, but it didn't knock me down anymore. I could remember the joy without Harold and June's cruelty contaminating every memory. Lily climbed up beside me and pointed at a photo of Joshua lifting me off my feet. She traced his face with her small finger and said clearly that Mama and Daddy looked happy. I hugged her close and told her yes. We were very happy and Daddy loved us both so much. She nodded like this made perfect sense and went back to her blocks, satisfied with this simple truth about her family. The restraining order still had 2.5 years remaining before expiration, but I'd already started planning to renew it. Montgomery had explained the process and assured me that given Harold and June's documented behavior, renewal would be straightforward. Their current silence and distance might mean they'd accepted defeat and moved on, or it might mean they were biding time and planning something new. I couldn't know which, and I refused to risk Lily's safety on assumptions about their intentions. The legal protection would stay firmly in place until Lily was old enough to make her own informed choices about whether she wanted contact with her father's parents. I kept copies of all the documentation in a fireproof safe, the restraining order paperwork, the fake DNA test results, records of every false CPS report, transcripts from the custody hearing. If they tried anything when the current order expired, I'd have an airtight case for renewal backed by years of evidence. Some nights I wondered if I was being paranoid, but then I'd remember Harold calling me an incubator and June's systematic campaign to paint me as an unfit mother. Better paranoid and protected than trusting and vulnerable. I started dating again after Valerie gently suggested during one of our sessions that isolation wasn't healing. The idea felt both disloyal to Joshua and necessary for moving forward with my life. I'd loved my husband deeply, and part of me worried that dating meant forgetting him or betraying his memory. Valerie reminded me that living fully was the best way to honor Joshua and model resilience for Lily. She said Joshua would want me to find happiness again, not spend decades alone mourning him. My first few dates were awkward and uncomfortable. Coffee meetings with men from dating apps who seemed nice enough but didn't quite click. I was honest about being a widowed single mother with complicated in-law history, which scared some guys off immediately. Others stuck around for a second date but couldn't handle the reality of a 4-year-old and legal drama. I didn't blame them because my situation was a lot to take on, but each failed connection stung a little. Still, the process felt hopeful in a way I hadn't expected. I was trying, putting myself out there, proving to myself that life continued beyond survival mode. Lily asked one morning if Uncle Bo could come to her 5th birthday party, and I agreed immediately. She'd been planning her party for weeks, talking about the unicorn cake and purple balloons and all her preschool friends coming over. Bo belonged on that list of important people, and his consistent respect and healthy boundaries had earned my trust. The party was loud and chaotic in the best way, with a dozen kids running around our backyard playing games and eating cake. Bo showed up with thoughtfully chosen gifts, including an art set Lily had mentioned wanting, and a framed photo of Joshua holding baby Lily that made me tear up. He played with the kids, helped with games, and several other parents commented on what a great uncle he was. One mom asked if he was single, and I laughed, appreciating the normalcy of playground parent matchmaking. The party felt joyful and ordinary, everything the first year after Joshua's death wasn't. Watching Lily blow out her candles surrounded by friends and family who loved her, I felt like we'd finally built something stable and good from the wreckage. I received a message from June 2 weeks after Lily's party, delivered through a mutual acquaintance who'd stayed neutral during the custody battle. The intermediary called saying June had begged her to pass along a request for just one photo of Lily. According to the message, June seemed genuinely broken and desperate for any connection to her granddaughter. She wasn't asking to see Lily or talk to me, just wanted one current picture to know what her granddaughter looked like now. The intermediary said June cried while making the request and seemed like a woman drowning in grief, rather than the calculating manipulator from the custody battle. I thanked the intermediary for passing along the message and said I needed time to think about it. I didn't respond to June and had no intention of responding, because any engagement opened a door I'd fought too hard to close. But the request haunted me with questions about mercy versus safety. Was June truly suffering, or was this another manipulation tactic? Did her pain matter when weighed against the trauma she'd inflicted? Could one photo really hurt anything, or would it encourage more boundary pushing? I had no answers, just the uncomfortable weight of someone else's grief pressing against my protective walls. I brought the photo request to my next therapy session with Valerie, and she helped me process it by examining the pattern of Harold and June's behavior from the start. Their initial response to Joshua's death wasn't grief, but ownership, treating Lily like property to claim rather than a child to comfort. Their methods weren't love but control, using lawyers and false reports and manipulation instead of supporting their widowed daughter-in-law. Their current desperation didn't erase the trauma they'd inflicted or prove they'd changed their fundamental view of Lily as belonging to them. Valerie said compassion for their pain didn't require sacrificing Lily's protection or my hard-won peace. She reminded me that June had called me horrible names in front of her entire family, that Harold had threatened to make sure I never saw my daughter again, that they'd systematically tried to destroy my reputation in the community. One photo might seem harmless, but it would tell them I was willing to engage, that my boundaries were negotiable, that persistence might eventually wear me down. Valerie said the kindest thing I could do for everyone was maintain the clear boundaries that kept Lily safe and me sane. The guilt about June's suffering was real, but so was my responsibility to protect my daughter from people who'd proven themselves dangerous. 8 months after the custody battle officially ended, I started planning Lily's transition to kindergarten in the fall. The elementary school had excellent ratings and a warm principal who took security concerns seriously. During enrollment, I provided full documentation of the restraining order against Harold and June. The school secretary added their names and photos to the banned persons list, flagged Lily's file with security alerts, and confirmed they were explicitly barred from any contact or information about Lily. The principal assured me they took these situations seriously and had protocols in place. Only I could pick up Lily, or authorize other adults to do so, and anyone attempting to gain information about her would be reported to police immediately. The security measures felt automatic now, just part of our life structure rather than crisis response. I filled out emergency contact forms listing Coraline and Bo, updated medical information, signed permission slips for field trips, normal parent tasks that felt remarkable in their ordinariness after everything we'd survived. I met James through work at a conference where we ended up sitting next to each other during a boring presentation and bonding over whispered jokes. He asked for my number, and we started texting, then had coffee, then actual dates. James was patient with my complicated situation and genuinely interested in getting to know both me and eventually Lily. We took things slowly because I wasn't ready to rush into anything, and he respected that completely. His steady presence felt like possibility after months of pure survival mode, like maybe there was space in my life for something beyond protecting Lily and processing grief. He asked thoughtful questions about Joshua and never seemed threatened by my past or tried to compete with my dead husband's memory. When I explained about the in-law situation in vague terms, he listened without judgment and didn't press for details I wasn't ready to share. He made me laugh, sent sweet good morning texts, and seemed content to let our relationship develop at whatever pace I needed. Beau called one evening sounding excited and nervous, asking if we could meet for coffee the next day because he had news. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd first talked after the DNA test explosion, and he told me he'd gotten engaged to his girlfriend. I congratulated him genuinely because I'd met her at Lily's party and she seemed lovely. Then Beau asked if Lily could be flower girl at their wedding, and my immediate protective instinct kicked in. The wedding would be out of state where Harold and June lived, and I started forming my refusal. But Beau quickly explained that his parents absolutely would not be invited, and he'd already arranged detailed security plans. He'd hired security guards for the venue, provided photos of Harold and June to all staff, and made it explicitly clear they were banned from the property. His bride fully supported this decision and understood that Lily's safety came before any family drama. Beau said he'd earned trust through consistent respect and healthy boundaries, and he hoped I'd let Lily be part of his special day. Looking at his earnest face, I realized he was right about earning trust. I agreed with conditions about security protocols and emergency plans, and Beau promised everything in writing. He thanked me with tears in his eyes, saying it meant everything to have his niece there celebrating with him. 9 months had passed since the fake DNA test, and most days I could look at myself in the mirror without feeling like a liar. The deception sat in my chest like a stone, but Lily was safe and that mattered more than my conscience. Harold and June had forced my hand by treating my grief like weakness, and my daughter like property they could claim through paperwork and manipulation. I'd protected her the only way they left available, and watching her thrive made the moral weight bearable even if it never fully disappeared. Some nights I still woke up thinking about what I'd done, but then I'd check on Lily sleeping peacefully in her room and remember why I'd crossed that line. She was mine to protect, and I'd make the same choice again if I had to. Lily started kindergarten in late August with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she walked through the school doors. She didn't cry or cling to my leg like some of the other kids. She just waved goodbye and ran to join the circle of students sitting on the carpet for morning meeting. Her teacher called me 3 weeks into the school year to schedule a conference, and my stomach dropped thinking something was wrong. But the teacher smiled when I sat down across from her desk and said Lily was doing wonderfully. She made friends easily, participated in class discussions, and her reading skills were above grade level. The teacher mentioned that Lily talked about her daddy sometimes during sharing time, explaining matter-of-factly that he died in a car accident, but she still loved him. The way Lily processed Joshua's death seemed healthy and age-appropriate according to the teacher. She wasn't showing signs of trauma or behavioral problems. Hearing that lifted weight off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months. I'd worried the custody battle and losing Joshua would damage her foundation, but she seemed okay. Better than okay, actually. James came to my house for dinner on a Saturday night 3 months after we started dating. Lily knew I had a friend named James who I spent time with, but this was their first official meeting. I'd made spaghetti, and Lily helped me set the table with paper napkins folded into triangles. When James arrived with flowers for me and a coloring book for Lily, she was accepted both gifts with shy politeness. They sat together at the kitchen table after dinner working on art projects while I cleaned dishes. James showed her how to blend colors with crayons, and they made up silly songs about the animals they were drawing. He never tried to act like her father or replace Joshua. He just treated her with genuine affection and respect, like she was a person worth knowing. Watching them laugh together over a drawing of a purple elephant made something in my chest unclench. Maybe there was space in our lives for more than just survival and protection. Maybe we could actually build something good. Montgomery called me on a Tuesday morning 10 months after the custody battle ended. Harold had sent a formal letter through a new lawyer requesting mediation to discuss healing the family rift. The letter used careful language about wanting to repair relationships and move forward for everyone's well-being. Montgomery read it to me over the phone, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. He said it was likely a manipulation attempt to get access to Lily, or trick me into admitting something about the DNA test. They might be hoping I'd slip up during mediation and reveal the test was fake, or they could be trying to establish a paper trail showing they'd attempted reconciliation, so they could file for grandparent visitation rights later. Montgomery advised declining through legal channels without any personal contact. I agreed immediately. The restraining order was my only communication with Harold and June, and that's how it would stay. Montgomery sent a response letter saying I was declining mediation, and the existing court orders remained in effect. 2 days later, Harold's lawyer sent back an angry letter calling me vindictive and accusing me of parental alienation. Montgomery filed it away in case we needed evidence of continued harassment. Beau's wedding took place on a Saturday in October at a vineyard 2 hours away. Lily wore a white dress with pink flowers and carried a basket of rose petals down the aisle with serious concentration on her face. She took her flower girl duties very seriously, carefully dropping petals every few steps like she'd practiced. Harold and June weren't invited as Beau had promised, and security guards at the venue entrance had photos of them with instructions to call police if they appeared. Beau's bride Sarah welcomed Lily warmly when we arrived for photos before the ceremony. She knelt down to Lily's level and complimented her dress and asked if she was excited to be flower girl. Sarah had met me twice before the wedding and knew the basic situation with Harold and June. She supported Beau's decision to exclude his parents completely and made it clear Lily was welcome in their family. The wedding was beautiful and normal and joyful. Watching Beau get married felt like reclaiming Joshua's family legacy from the toxic elements that had tried to corrupt it. Lily danced at the reception and ate too much cake and fell asleep in the car on the drive home. Nearly a year had passed since Joshua died when Lily and I visited his grave on a Sunday afternoon in November. She'd picked wildflowers from the park near our house that morning and carried them carefully in her small hands. We walked across the cemetery grass to his headstone, and Lily placed the flowers at the base while I stood behind her with my hand on her shoulder. She told Daddy about kindergarten and her teacher and the new friend she'd made named Olivia. She told him about Uncle Beau's wedding and how she got to throw flower petals. Then she mentioned her new friend James, who taught her to draw elephants and made funny voices when he read books. I knelt down next to Lily and told Joshua I'd protected our daughter the only way I could when his parents tried to take her. I said I hoped he understood the choices I'd made even though they weren't clean or simple. I told him Lily was safe and loved and thriving. Then we sat quietly for a few minutes before Lily asked if we could go get ice cream. Life continued forward even while we honored what was lost. James took me to dinner at a quiet restaurant the week before Thanksgiving, while Coraline watched Lily. We'd been dating for 6 months and the relationship had developed slowly and carefully. He reached across the table and took my hand and said he was falling in love with both me and Lily. He said he was ready for whatever pace we needed and he wasn't trying to rush anything. The relationship felt like healing instead of replacement, like building something new while still honoring what Joshua and I had together. Lily called him James, not Daddy, and everyone respected that distinction. James never pushed for a father role or tried to compete with Joshua's memory. He just showed up consistently and treated us both with kindness and patience. When I told him I had feelings for him too but needed to keep taking things slow, he smiled and said he'd wait as long as I needed. We finished dinner and drove back to my house where Lily was already asleep on Coraline's lap watching a movie. I was genuinely happy now in ways that seemed impossible during those first devastating weeks after Joshua died. Lily was thriving in kindergarten with friends and confidence and healthy ways of talking about her daddy. We had a family structure built on love instead of possession, with Coraline and Beau and James forming a support system that felt solid. Legal barriers and geographic distance kept us protected from Harold and June, who lived 800 miles away, convinced of delusions they'd never let go. The fake DNA test remained my secret burden and protection, sitting in my chest like a stone I'd learned to carry. It was morally complicated and ethically messy, but absolutely effective. We were safe. We were healing. We were building a future that honored Joshua's memory without being destroyed by his parents' dysfunction. Some mornings I woke up and felt actual joy instead of just relief at surviving another day. Lily would climb into my bed and tell me about her dreams, and I'd make pancakes while she colored at the kitchen table. Normal life had returned in ways I'd thought were lost forever when Joshua died. The grief remained, but it didn't consume everything anymore. There was room for happiness alongside the loss, and that felt like its own kind of victory.